Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
I had only just moved into the neighborhood when I started hearing about Karen. She was the kind of person everyone seemed to have a story about. It was hard to tell where the truth ended and the neighborhood gossip began, but there was no doubt she was infamous around here. "You'll meet her soon enough," they'd say with a sort of wary chuckle, and honestly, I thought they were exaggerating. It wasn't long before I saw her for myself, storming down the street one afternoon, clipboard in hand, and her eyes narrowed like she was on a mission. She had this look, the sort of steely determination that made you second-guess even standing in your own yard, as if she might suddenly turn on you, clipboard ready to jot down whatever she deemed unacceptable about your life. Sure enough, a few days later, I got the full Karen experience. I was tending to my garden when I saw her marching straight toward me, a set look of disapproval already on her face. She didn't waste any time on pleasantries. "You're new here," she stated, as if I didn't already know that. "I hope you'll be following the rules, unlike some people around here." She glanced pointedly over her shoulder, clearly referencing someone. "We can't have everyone just doing whatever they want. There's a reason we have guidelines, and I make sure they're enforced." "Oh yeah, I'm definitely planning to keep up with things," I said, trying to sound agreeable. I could tell she was already making mental notes about me, sizing me up to see if I'd be another one of her projects. From that point on, it was like having a hawk watching my every move. She made it her business to check on everyone. And heaven help you if she decided you were out of line. Just a few days after our first interaction, I heard her voice again. But this time she wasn't talking to me. She was at my neighbor's door, practically shouting, "Bill, this is unacceptable," she was saying, her voice echoing down the street. "You can't leave your trash cans out like this. They're supposed to be taken back in by 9 a.m., and it's already noon." Bill, a soft-spoken retired teacher who'd lived in the neighborhood for years, looked completely overwhelmed. "Karen, I just forgot this once. It won't happen again," he said, trying to placate her. But she wasn't having it. "Once is all it takes for standards to start slipping," she snapped. "If I let you do it, then everyone thinks they can get away with it. And then where would we be?" The poor man just nodded, murmuring apologies, but she kept at it, reminding him about the strict protocol for trash can placement, as if he hadn't heard her the first dozen times. The following week, Karen decided to take things up a notch. She called a neighborhood meeting. "Just an informal gathering," she said, but everyone knew that meant she had a list of complaints to air out. I almost didn't go, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see just how far she would go, and honestly, I wasn't disappointed. We gathered in the community center, a small building that barely fit all of us, and as soon as everyone settled down, Karen took the stage. Clipboard in hand, she scanned the room with a look of pure determination. "I called this meeting because there are serious issues that need addressing," she began, her voice sharp. "It's come to my attention that some of you are not following the guidelines we agreed upon as a community. I won't name names," she paused, eyes zeroing in on a few familiar faces, "but you know who you are." She launched into a list of grievances that ranged from lawn heights exceeding regulation length to mailboxes that need repainting. But the kicker, not that I'd ever say that word, came when she turned her focus to the holiday decorations. "I noticed some of you have started putting up your Halloween decorations early," she said, her mouth tightening as if she'd just tasted something sour. "The official date for Halloween decorations is October 1st. It is currently September 25th. We cannot have people jumping the gun just because they feel like it." A murmur went through the crowd. Most of us were more than a little amused by this. Really, Halloween decorations, but Karen was dead serious. She looked around the room, daring anyone to challenge her, and I swear her gaze alone could probably melt steel. One brave soul, a woman named Sarah, raised her hand. "Karen, I think it's okay if people want to get festive a few days early. It's just a fun holiday after all." Karen turned on her so fast it was almost impressive. "Fun has nothing to do with it, Sarah. Rules are rules. If we let this slide, then what next? Christmas decorations in November? We have to draw the line somewhere." It was almost comical, watching Sarah's expression. She clearly hadn't expected that kind of reaction, and she quickly nodded, her cheeks turning red. Karen looked around, satisfied that she'd made her point. "I'll be doing rounds on October 1st to make sure everything is as it should be. If I see anything out of place before then, there will be consequences." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The whole room felt tense, everyone too afraid to laugh, but the looks people exchanged said it all. Karen had crossed a line, and everyone knew it. Over the next few weeks, Karen continued her crusade, keeping an eye on everyone's homes like some kind of self-appointed sheriff. She even took to snapping photos of people's yards to document any infractions. And naturally, she'd send them in the group email chain with a subject line like urgent, community standards violation. It got to the point where people started avoiding her entirely, ducking inside if they saw her coming. She didn't seem to care. If anything, it made her feel even more powerful. One day, though, things came to a head. Karen decided she'd had enough of Bill's old lawn gnome collection. He had about 5 or 6 of them lined up by his flower bed, harmless little figures that had been there for years. But Karen apparently decided they didn't meet the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. "Bill," she said, cornering him outside his house, "we need to talk about those gnomes. They're tacky and they bring down the overall look of the community. I think it's time you got rid of them." Bill looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "These gnomes were gifts from my late wife. I'm not getting rid of them," he said firmly. Karen's face went red. "Bill, we all have to make sacrifices for the good of the community. You wouldn't want your property value to suffer because of those things, would you?" By now, a few of us had gathered, curious to see how this would play out. Bill shook his head. "Karen, I think you're the only one who cares. These gnomes stay." The look on Karen's face was priceless. She sputtered, clearly unused to anyone standing up to her. For a moment, I thought she was going to explode. But instead, she whipped out her phone and snapped a picture of the gnomes, probably planning to report it in her next email. That evening, sure enough, an email went out to the whole neighborhood. "It has come to my attention that certain individuals are displaying items that do not align with the community's standards. This behavior is not acceptable, and if it continues, I will be forced to escalate the matter." Nobody replied to the email, but that didn't stop the whispers from spreading. People were finally starting to push back. Small things at first. A pumpkin on a porch a week early, lights strung up before the designated start date. But it was clear that Karen's iron grip on the neighborhood was slipping. She couldn't patrol everyone all the time, and the more she tried, the more people seemed to rebel, quietly but unmistakably. Finally, Karen decided to escalate things herself. She tried to bring the HOA board into it, demanding they issue formal warnings to everyone she deemed in violation. But the board, who had grown as weary of Karen as the rest of us, refused. They even suggested she take a break from her self-imposed duties. Karen didn't take it well. At the next HOA meeting, she arrived, red-faced and seething, ready to launch into another tirade about how nobody respects the rules anymore. But by then, the crowd had lost patience. People started speaking up, challenging her ridiculous demands, questioning her authority. It was almost a mutiny, and for once Karen found herself without her usual audience of silent nods. In the end, she stormed out of that meeting muttering about how ungrateful we all were, leaving us to laugh and shake our heads. Things didn't change overnight, but it was a start. Karen still patrols the streets, but her power has faded, and most people just ignore her now, putting up their holiday decorations whenever they please. Sometimes when I see her walking by, still clutching that clipboard like it's her last lifeline, I almost feel a little sorry for her. Almost. This Karen lady is a total nutjob. Who the hell does she think she is, going around telling people when they can put up Halloween decorations? It's not like she owns the whole neighborhood. And harassing poor Bill about his trash cans, give me a break. Someone needs to tell her to mind her own damn business and get a real hobby. Maybe if she focused on her own life instead of everyone else's, she wouldn't be such a miserable witch. I'd love to see her try that crap in my neighborhood. She'd get a reality check real quick. I can't believe people put up with this Karen's nonsense for so long. She's clearly on some kind of power trip, acting like she's the neighborhood dictator. That clipboard of hers might as well be a scepter. And what's with the constant emails and photos? Does she not have anything better to do with her time? It's pathetic, really. I'm glad people finally started standing up to her, but it should have happened way sooner. Bet she's the type who'd call the cops on kids for selling lemonade without a permit. Karen needs to take a chill pill and stop acting like she's the queen of the neighborhood. It's just sad how she goes around harassing people over the tiniest things. Like, who cares about lawn height or mailbox paint? She's probably just lonely and bored, but that doesn't give her the right to make everyone else miserable. I'm glad the wallboard finally shut her down. Maybe now she'll find a hobby that doesn't involve being a total pain in the ass to everyone around her.
If you like our stories, then please like and subscribe and comment, and remember to hit that bell icon so you never miss out. We have new stories almost every day.
When I got that notice from the HOA, my heart sank. This wasn't some little tweak to our community rules. T was an absolute bombshell. I've been living in this cul-de-sac corner in Georgia since 2015, paying my $1,100 in HOA fees each year like clockwork, and never once did I question that the exterior fence was someone else's responsibility. It was pretty straightforward when I bought the place. Maintenance of that fence was on the HOA, but now, apparently, they've decided it's no longer their problem. And just like that, I'm expected to pick up the pieces for nearly 500 feet of decrepit wood that's been left to rot since the 90s. I mean, I'm furious. It's not even about the money. Well, look, it is partially about the money. But it's also about trust. I feel like the HOA is practically scamming me here. They dangled promises and assurances, and I believed them. They said multiple times that they'd replace the fence, so I made plans, held off on spending to fix it myself, and now they're pulling the rug out from under me. Not to mention, I feel like the only person actually affected here, since I'm right up against the fence line. The houses further in, they couldn't care less. It's not their view that's blocked by warped boards and splintered wood. I couldn't sit on it. I went down to the HOA office determined to get some real answers. The office, though, was just a couple of people sitting at folding tables in a rented room in our clubhouse. It was clear right away they weren't going to be helpful. As I tried to explain my situation, I was met with blank stares and murmurs about budget cuts and reallocation of funds. The HOA president, Greg, whose face is always twisted up in a look that screams he's sick of everyone, barely even looked up from his phone while I was talking. I laid it all out, practically begging them to reconsider. But no, they just waved it off like it was no big deal. Like my frustration was some petty complaint instead of a major concern. One board member, a woman named Linda, gave me this fake sympathetic look and said, "Oh, we're sorry you feel that way, but it's just not feasible to keep covering the fence upkeep for individual homeowners." Individual homeowners? This wasn't even a private fence. It was the boundary for the entire community. But apparently, I was supposed to just suck it up and pay for it myself now. When I pressed them on why they didn't even bother putting it to a vote, Greg rolled his eyes and muttered something about fiduciary responsibility and reallocating resources. Fiduciary responsibility? They were acting like my yard was some tiny backyard project, not the literal wall surrounding our neighborhood. I started to realize that they weren't going to budge. It was obvious they'd made this decision without consulting anyone who would actually be impacted. And honestly, who were they to decide what was feasible? None of them had nearly the same fence exposure I did. They were insulated from this problem, living on the other side of the neighborhood. By the time I stormed out of that meeting, I knew I had to fight back, but I had no clue what my options were. I went home and started diving into the HOA's bylaws. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I could tell something didn't add up. This change they made, it didn't match anything I read in our covenant agreements. They had been maintaining that fence for over 20 years. There had to be some kind of rule against them suddenly washing their hands of it, right? Frustrated and exhausted, I finally decided to reach out to an attorney. She was a friend of a friend, and I wasn't sure how seriously she'd take my case, but the moment I explained the situation, she was immediately on board. Apparently, there's something called estoppel, a fancy legal term that basically says you can't just change an agreement that's been in place for decades without following proper channels. My attorney said that because the HOA had set a precedent for maintaining the fence, they couldn't just decide it wasn't their responsibility without putting it to a vote. Finally, some good news. With my lawyer's encouragement, I filed a complaint and prepared to take this to court. It felt like I was gearing up for a battle, one that I didn't ask for but was determined to win. I'd been lied to, and I wasn't about to let them get away with it. But as much as I was ready to fight, I was also nervous. This was a huge commitment, time, money, and stress, but what choice did I have? If I didn't stand up now, they'd keep pulling stunts like this, and the next thing I knew, they'd be telling us to maintain the sidewalks too. A couple of weeks went by, and then, out of nowhere, I started hearing whispers. Some neighbors had caught wind of my complaint, and it was like I'd poked a sleeping bear. People I barely knew were stopping me in the street, asking me about the lawsuit, grumbling about how the HOA was always hiking up fees but never actually doing anything worthwhile. A few even mentioned that they'd also been considering challenging the board, especially over the arbitrary way they seemed to make decisions. I was no longer alone in this. A movement was brewing. But the HOA wasn't about to go down without a fight. Soon I started receiving letters in the mail from the board, thinly veiled attempts to intimidate me into backing off. They said things like, "We hope you understand the financial strain this could place on the community," or, "It would be unfortunate if this decision affected our ability to fund other amenities." I saw right through it. They were trying to make me feel like I was the bad guy here, the one risking the community's resources. But I knew better. This was their mess, not mine. When the court date finally arrived, I walked in there feeling more prepared than I ever thought possible. My attorney laid everything out perfectly, showing the judge how the HOA had gone back on years of precedent and tried to shift the burden onto me without any due process. Greg and Linda were there, looking none too pleased to see me. I remember how Linda tried to interrupt my attorney's arguments, claiming that the fence was never officially documented as the HOA's responsibility. But my lawyer had come prepared, bringing copies of old community newsletters and meeting minutes that clearly stated otherwise. The judge, to my relief, seemed unimpressed by the HOA's weak excuses. He practically glared at Greg and Linda, demanding answers that they just didn't have. Their stammering and backpedaling almost made me feel sorry for them. Almost. They'd dug their own hole, and now they were just scrambling to climb out, but as they kept stumbling over their own words, I felt something shift. It was like the power was finally in my hands. When the judge ruled in my favor, I could barely contain my relief. The HOA was ordered to continue maintaining the fence as they had before. Not only that, but they were slapped with a reminder about the importance of actually involving the community in major decisions. My attorney gave me a small smile, clearly proud of the win. And I felt like I'd actually accomplished something, not just for myself, but for every homeowner who'd been steamrolled by this HOA's arbitrary decisions. After the ruling, Greg and Linda wouldn't even look at me. I guess they were too embarrassed to face the person who had called them out, but as much as I enjoyed that small victory, I knew this fight was far from over. They'd probably try some new trick in the future, but at least now they knew I wasn't just going to sit back and let them trample all over me. In the days that followed, I was greeted with quiet nods and thumbs up from my neighbors. People who'd been wary of getting involved before were suddenly inspired to stand up for themselves too. And while I was happy to have their support, a part of me wished it hadn't taken such a massive headache to get here. Still, I had shown the HOA that they couldn't just toss responsibilities around like a game of hot potato. That exterior fence wasn't just wood and nails. It was a reminder that sometimes you've got to stand up and fight for what's right, even when it feels like the odds are against you. C1. Read the CC&Rs for the HOA to find who is truly responsible. That would be a good starting point to see what your options are. Without more information, unfortunately, it will be hard to say much more. If the CC&Rs mention HOA responsibility, then your next step will be to get clarification from the board as to when that change occurred and how. There should be procedures in the CC&Rs and how to amend them. Typically, a vote from the homeowners. C2. At this point, with what I've read, you should get a consultation from an attorney. They would be able to advise if your potential options and how to move forward. Given the price of fixing the fence and how the HOA had said they would fix it now they won't, etc., a consultation will help you understand your options. I would also ask the HOA how they came to the determination that they previously were responsible and now they are not. Did they speak with an attorney to make sure they didn't misinterpret or open themselves up to being liable? You may not get any good responses from the HOA, but it's worth a try.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.